Hey everyone, this is Ledergor at Gong.io, and today I'm going to walk you through weathering the storm of successful sales conversations. So hopefully this is a topic very relevant to each and every one of us. Let's get started and see what's on the agenda. So, closing the deal is pretty much like embarking on a voyage at sea. We're going to have storms to weather, three in particular in today's talk. And we're going to have some calms between the storms, and we're going to talk about getting through those without losing our calm. So let's get started. We'll be going through a journey that is like a journey on the sea, and we're going to use the analogy of the ocean and the calms and the storms to hopefully get us to a successful close. So we're all looking to get to paradise, and in the sales world, everyone knows what that paradise is, right? It's closing the deal, getting the win. It's not going to be easy. We're going to have a long, complex voyage to get there, especially in tech sales, complex sales. We need several sales conversations. There's a ton of things that can sink our ship along the way. The most common one, poorly navigated sales conversations. So you don't want to be the next one whose ship is sunk because of a bad sales conversation, and there's no reason it should be. So today we're going to be taking that journey together and getting some insights that will hopefully allow us to navigate those stormy waters. Okay, every sales conversation you encounter throughout the sales cycle is like an ocean storm. It can be unpredictable. You might have multiple buyers, multiple decision makers, different agendas, different interests. There are waves crashing left and right, literally. And if you're going to arrive at the promised land and get the deal closed, you have to be able to navigate these stormy sales conversations with skill. And hopefully today, by the time we're done with this short presentation, you will have gained a couple of new skills that will take you through these stormy waters. By contrast, the times between sales conversation are relatively calm and easy. If and only if you navigate your sales conversation successfully, right? You don't want to be there, biting your fingernails waiting for the customer to call. You want to know what the next steps are. We're going to talk about that as well. If you manage to navigate your sales conversation like a master sea captain, then the times between sales conversations are your calm in the storm. By the time you have the next meeting scheduled, all you have to do is sit back and wait. Okay? But you don't want to forget to schedule that next meeting, and you want to set up the conversation so that next meeting is set. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So here are the three different storms we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about discovery calls, we're going to be talking about demo calls, and finally we'll talk a little bit about objection handling. Okay, those are the three of the main storms we're going to hit across any sales cycle of a complex sales. And we're going to see different techniques for handling difficulties that can arise during each of those three different storms and how best to weather that storm. Okay, now these things can come up several times in every deal. They definitely come up several times in multiple deals. So you want to really hone in on these skills because you're going to be using them a lot. Okay, think of the skills we're going to learn today as your compass. This will help you get through discovery calls, demo calls, and objection handling. And of course, each case is different. So we're going to be talking about some high-level skills and approaches. Obviously, you're going to have to adapt these to your specific audience, your specific buyer, and your product. So how do we get these insights? So here at Gong.io, we analyze more than 1 million sales calls. I believe the most recent number is actually more than 2 million sales calls. And these are real-life sales calls. We have the world's largest repository of real-life B2B sales calls that we've analyzed, aggregated, and anonymized from our customers. Okay, so in case you haven't heard about Gong before, so customers like LinkedIn and ZipRecruiter and GE and NASDAQ and ADP use Gong every day to optimize thousands of sales calls used by tens of thousands of reps worldwide. And then they use those insights to see what their top reps are doing differently than everyone else. What are they saying or doing on the sales calls that's different? And then they can replicate that behavior across their sales team. Okay, so more sales calls are successful, more deals are won. And we took those insights and we used them to create industry benchmarks. And some of those industry benchmarks on demo, discovery, and objection handling are what I'm going to be sharing with you here today. So let's dive right in. We're going to start with discovery call. Okay, and this is our first stop on our voyage to the promised land. So here's one that your mother may have taught you when she said, use your ears twice as much as use your mouth. That's why God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. She was actually right. It turns out that the top sales rep talk only about 46% of the time. And you can see that the average reps and the lowest performing reps talk a lot more. So I can tell from my personal experience, when I started using Gong, I was talking way more than I thought. I was probably talking like 75 or 80% of the time. This is a tendency most of us have. We have a lot to say, especially in marketing. We love the sound of our own voice. And as soon as you start measuring your talk time with a tool like Gong, you will see how much you're talking and how you're actually hurting your chances of closing that deal and getting that next call. Okay, so your talk time is super critical, and we found a direct and strong correlation between lowering your talk time and getting a better chance of seeing that next conversation or closing that deal. Here's another point on discovery calls, and it is asking the right number of questions. You can see that what we measured here is the number of questions, that's the x-axis, how many questions the sales rep is asking, and the y-axis is actually showing us the chances of this deal succeeding. And you can see that initially there's a linear correlation, so the more questions we ask, the better the chances of moving the deal forward. But that sort of flattens out towards the end, and the next slide shows you the actual numbers. So it turns out that 11 to 14 is the optimal number of questions to ask on most discovery calls for a B2B sale. If you ask fewer than that, you're probably not discovering everything that you need about your customer. You're not going to get him or her engaged enough, and you're probably not going to be able to offer the best solution. Turns out that if you ask way more than 14 questions, if you go into the 18 or 20 question realm, you're asking too much, and then it starts feeling like an interrogation or like you haven't done your homework, and your chances of succeeding with this deal actually diminish. Okay, so you want to plan out your questions to be about 11 to 14 if you can. Now let's talk a bit about how we want to distribute these questions on our call. So it turns out there's a winning pattern here as well. If you look at the red pattern on the right, these are average reps. You can see the number of questions towards the beginning of the call is high. They tend to front load their questions. And this is really intuitive. I mean, a lot of sales reps, they just want to get through the discovery part early enough to even see if this prospect is worth their time. What happens though is that you're decreasing your chance of moving forward with the deal if you do this, because once again, your prospect is feeling like she's being interrogated. She's less likely to open up and continue the conversation. In contrast, look at the yellow bars on the left. These are top performers. You can see that they are sprinkling their 11 to 14 questions from start to finish, and they don't make the prospect feel like she's being interrogated. So this is also something important. Everyone knows that you have to go through the motions and you have a list of qualifying questions to ask, but don't make it painfully obvious that you're asking them all up front. Try to listen to the story, take it to the direction where the prospect takes you, and then wait a little before going to your next question. So you want to sprinkle those questions as evenly as you can across your discovery call. Here's another really important one about asking the right kind of questions, okay? And here what we're seeing is that the more you let the customer talk, the more you cause the customer to open up and talk for longer extended periods of time, the higher your chances of moving forward with this deal are. And this actually makes sense. A prospect that is asked an open-ended question that is about a relevant topic and gets her to talk in length, you know she's entirely focused on you right now. She's not checking her Facebook or her LinkedIn. And you actually have a better chance of understanding her needs. And once we do reach the demo part in a few minutes, your demo will be much better focused on this customer's needs. So let's see a few more examples of this. Here, you see here, the top line shows the speaking parts where the rep is talking, and the bottom line shows where the customer is talking. And you can see the yellow bits that we've highlighted is where a single short open-ended question caused the customer to open up and talk for what we call a monologue or a long period of time. This is a wonderful thing when that long period of time comes from the customer, okay? So you'll want to keep this in mind during discovery. Don't just ask yes or no questions, because you'll be over with them very quickly and they get boring to the customer, and you'll be losing her focus very soon. If you ask short, open-ended questions, we'll see this also in the demo part, you're much likely to get longer answers, which will highly engage the prospect and increase your chances of getting the deal. Here are a few examples to help you out. So instead of asking, are you or do you, which can result in a yes or no answer, how about starting question with, help me understand, and then talk about the topic you want to understand about their business problem. Can you walk me through how your organization does this or that process that you want to learn about? Talk to me about how you use your CRM system. So anything that would get her telling a story, thinking about structuring her answer, and get her to talk longer, okay? It may feel a little bit artificial initially, but once you learn how to do this and you genuinely listen and use that information to shape your demo that's coming up, you will see how your conversations are much deeper and you create a much better connection, which in turn will allow you to move forward much better. Okay, so this is what we have today on discovery calls. I'm going to move on to the next storm, and the next storm is going to be the demo call. Okay, so we got through discovery, we got all that information, we asked the right questions. Now we need to craft our demo to resolve the problems that we just talked about in the discovery call. So how do we structure that demo correctly? Here's a nice framework that you can think of it as an upside down pyramid, okay? So the flow of the demo should match what was discussed in the discovery call. Think about a successful demo flow as an upside down pyramid where you start with the most important thing first. So your first demo point should be what you discussed most in depth during discovery, followed by the topic you discussed a little bit less about, and followed by all the other topics that you almost didn't touch on. And again, this is a good way of also seeing why discovery is so important to a successful demo. If you have a one-size-fits-all demo, it's probably a one-size-fits-no-one demo, because every prospect has a slightly different business problem, and even if you're selling the same product to everyone, they don't want you to feature dump on them. They don't want to hear about 25 features that your product has. They actually want to hear about 2 or 3 features that solve the exact business problem they are having. And if you ask your questions correctly during the discovery phase, then this is your time to shine. And these are just sample topics. You see coaching and pipeline management and onboarding. So if this customer talked about her coaching problems for half of the discovery call, this should be my #1 focus during the demo call. And if the second topic she talked about was pipeline management, then this should be my secondary focus. And finally, onboarding should be my third focus if she spent very little time talking about it. And maybe I'm used to talking about the onboarding features of my product more than I am about the coaching features, but that is going to be the wrong approach for this customer. Okay, so really don't ignore the information that you gather in discovery, and this will help you hone in on the exact talking points that you need to start with and how long you need to spend on them. Here's another very important interactivity metric that we use, and this is how many speaker changes in a minute we have. Okay, so you can see the x-axis is how many times the speaker switched between the salesperson and the rep during a minute of the demo call. And you can see the success rate of that call. And the way we measure success rates is 100% is if you got the next call and that continued on to a deal. It's 0% if this was the last call, okay? So you can see that the more speaker switches in a minute, the higher the success rate of this call and the higher your chances of getting the next call are. This is super, super important. Let me visualize that for you in another way, okay? Here is a call or a visualization of a call that you do not want to see. Why? Because look at the salesperson depicted here in purple. The salesperson is talking for extended periods of time. There are long monologues, and that does not allow frequent speaker switches. In contrast, look at this call. This is a much better call that did get the next call. You can see that both parties are actually talking for shorter periods of time, allowing for a lot more engagement and interactivity. And again, this, once you understand, is actually very, very intuitive. The more you go back and forth, the more attentive the prospect has to be, the more attentive you appear to be, and everyone's more engaged in the conversation. So you're collecting more information, you're creating more intimacy and rapport, and you're much more likely to get that next call. Okay, so keep the interaction going. If you're talking for too long, just stop, ask an open-ended question, get the prospect to open up again, and keep taking it from there. Here's a really, really big one for demo, and that is when and how to bring up pricing. Okay, so Many times the prospect is going to be the one who brings up pricing. And I'm sure all of us have been in the situation where you're talking for like 5 minutes and the prospect says, okay, so how much does it cost? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? You could say, well, it's a good thing. They want to know how much it costs. Maybe they're interested in buying, right? Maybe they are, but chances are they're not. Chances are you're already boring them and they don't think they're a good fit, and they're asking for your price so they can back out and say it's too expensive, I don't have a budget, or some sort of objection based on your pricing. So here's what the good reps do. The good reps, and you can see them here in the red line, or sorry, in the pink line, the good reps establish value in the first like 2/3 of the call and dodge pricing questions or avoid them altogether until the last part of the call. The average or worst performing reps get pricing mentioned at the very beginning of the call before they established value, and that's what kills so many deals. If you talk about price before you established value, and many of us know that intuitively, if you talk about price before you've established value, you're decreasing chances of moving forward, because now it's a pricing conversation. So I want a discount, but you haven't seen the product yet. I haven't shown you how it can solve your business problem yet. Okay, so this is a really important tip, and it's also a warning sign for you. If 5 minutes into your demo, the prospect is asking you about pricing, you need to think about that for your next demo. How do I improve my demo so I get to actually establish value and address my prospect's concerns based on the discovery call we had before pricing is brought up? So you want to be in control. You want to save pricing for the last third or last quarter of the call. To be in control, you need to spend most of the call establishing value. This is a really, really important tip. Here's another really big one. And again, we're all taught this in sales school. Never leave a call without establishing next steps. Well, it turns out we've measured that, and it's also pretty accurate and pretty straightforward. So it turns out that the top performing reps, they spend almost twice the amount of time on discussing next steps during the demo call than the unsuccessful reps during their demos. So you can see here that in unsuccessful demos, next steps are discussed for approximately 5% of the call, while in successful demos that get that next call, then those next steps are discussed more than 8% of the time. And this is super important. So you want to plan out your time. One way of starting the conversation is to reconfirm how much time your prospect has. So we at Gong like to ask something like, so I know we scheduled this call for 45 minutes. Is that still okay? Do you still have that time for me today? And maybe your prospect had another meeting come in 30 minutes. And if she tells you that up front, you'll be able to rework your time planning of the demo and make sure that you leave the last few minutes to discuss next steps. You don't want to run out of time and having the prospect say, well, I have to leave in like a minute. And then you're really stuck and probably don't have time to discuss next steps in depth. If you have to choose between showing one more feature or using that minute to deepen everyone's understanding into what next steps are, I would say talk about next steps and dodge that, forget about that last feature, which if you left at the end of a successfully planned demo is probably a feature that's least important to your prospect anyway. Okay, so this is super important. Always leave enough time to discuss next steps, and there's probably no such thing as talking too long about next step. Okay, we're getting there. So there's one last column before we reach the promised land. We've discussed successful traits and tactics for discovery calls. We've discussed very important techniques on discussing pricing, interactivity, and next steps during the demo call. And we're now moving to the last part of today's presentation, and that's going to be objection handling. So I've got just 2 or 3 really important tips that we found from our research on the science of sales, the way we like to call it here at Gong. And we're going to talk a bit about objection handling. So we're getting close. We can smell the pina coladas and ocean air at the President's Club. Let's see what we need to do to get there. Okay, so this one is probably one of the more scarier storms for many of us. How do we handle objections? So let's handle the storm together. We'll weather it together, I promise. No one gets wet. Here we go. So here is the typical knee-jerk reaction to a customer objection. I know I can't see you right now because we're on a recorded session, but raise your hand if this has happened to you before, even if there's no one else in the room. How many times have you heard a short, simple rejection and you went on a 2 or 3 minute monologue explaining why they should still buy from you despite that rejection or objection. So that's happened to all of us, okay? And you can see it here, the short yellow line on the left is the prospect asking a simple question or raising an objection, and the big chunk of yellow at the top is the rep going on and on about how he wants to handle that objection. And what that does, because I've been there, okay? I've done this many times, so you feel, oh, but I've got the best explanation to why that objection can be alleviated, and let me just tell you everything I know about it, and it can take like 5 minutes. Just like the long monologues that we talked about earlier, you're actually losing engagement there. And what's even worse, if you make these long monologues as a response to a prospect objection, it actually triggers insecurity, and you're starting to talk in circles, but he said and she said, and it actually gets you nowhere. So let's see what the top reps do when they get objections, which is in stark contrast to what we just saw here, okay? The first thing, which is probably starting to form a pattern by now, as you can see, is that they talk less, okay? The best reps talk less than the worst reps, okay? So what we can see here, again on the pink, used to denote the top reps. Sorry, here on the pink is the average performers, my bad. Here on the pink is the average performers. They will talk more than 20 seconds on average in response to an objection. You can see that the top performers only talk about 10 seconds. That's about half. And the average performers are somewhere in the middle. So this is something visual for you to remember to show confidence and move on to the next topic, because you don't want to dwell on each and every objection for 5 minutes. Keep your answers brief. Keep them brief. And I'm going to take you to another trick here in the next slide. In many objections, in many cases, the best response to the objection is a question. Okay, why? Because many times you misunderstood the objection. Many times your prospect is saying something that your competitor told her to tell you or ask you because they thought that you'd start wiggling in your place and be hard to come up with an answer. Why don't you ask a follow-up question, try to better understand that objection? Why is that important to you? Let me understand the exact situation you're talking about so I know I'm addressing your exact objection or concern. Okay, they rarely call them objections, they're more concerns. So you can see here that top performers, in 54% of the cases, they will handle objection with a follow-up question, whereas the average performers only ask questions 31% of the time. And again, this should tell you something about the DNA that makes a successful salesperson. He or she are going to ask questions when faced with an objection. Many times that will completely overrule that objection, or at least give you a much better understanding of what that objection, where it stems from, so you can address it in the best way and move on. And whatever you do, don't go on a 5-minute rant, because that's never the solution. Okay, so those are just a few tips today about keeping it short and using questions to follow up on objections in our objection part of the presentation. And looks like we've made it. If you follow these insights as your compass, as you navigate the ocean of your deal. We talked about 3 different storms that we wanted to weather today. We talked about discovery call, we talked about the demo call, and finally we talked about objection handling. This will greatly increase your chances of making it to the next call, and to the call after that, and to the call after that, because you didn't forget to set next steps, right? And ultimately, in more cases than not, that will lead you to a successful deal. This is a muscle that, or several muscles we talked about today, that maybe you haven't been practicing or haven't been using. Some of them will feel like you're out of your skin in the beginning, and that's fine. That's okay. Learning any new skill or training out or learning a new profession or sport always feels uncomfortable initially, but that's where learning begins, outside our comfort zone. And I suggest that you review this presentation. You have access to the recorded presentation anytime you like. Review it, keep a few tips that you want to take. You don't have to do it all at once. Start by just practicing one, like noticing your talk time. It's harder than you think. Shutting up is harder than you think. And if you want to read more in-depth material about all of the techniques that we talked today, and dozens more techniques that you can use to improve your next sales conversation, all you need to do is go to gong.io/blog. That's gong.io/blog. And you can search by topic. You can search for objection handling. You can search for cold calling. You can search for competitive positioning. You can search about pricing. And you will find all of our blog articles written by our product marketing and by Gong Labs, which is our team of data scientists that rummage through millions of sales conversation every week, so you don't have to. And they pull out these golden nuggets of insights that you can use on your next sales calls to make your next call better than your last. And if you've seen all that and you want to do this on a daily basis and get your team up to speed and give it a competitive edge, you can also go to gong.io and request your demo, a live demo of Gong, and you'll see how our conversation intelligence system can help you figure out what your top reps on your team are doing differently so you can replicate those behaviors across the entire team. So if you've survived this long, thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, I'm Udi Ledergor at gong.io, signing off and wishing you all successful sales conversation and closing many, many deals. Have a good one.